11 a.m., how we doing? I was telling Peggy Bumpus right before the service, the 9 a.m. the last month or two has got you guys beat. But I feel like this morning the tides may have been a little switched. So are we good? Are we ready to go? Anybody lose a finger a couple days ago? All right, let's put up the picture. The year is 2011. What are you laughing at, Kathy? We went to Kenya together. I can pick on her. We spent 15 days together, and we would do it all over again, right? Ooh, I got you then. Oh, okay. All right, 2011, two people up there. That's obviously me on the left, Rachel on the right. If you don't know Rachel, that's my wife. And I kind of just gave away the story, but let me give you a story. So in these two pictures, we don't know each other, and we're living on opposite sides of the country. So that picture of me on the left, I am literally in Little Italy in downtown Boston. And the reason why I'm in Boston is I did my first year of seminary at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. And on the right, that is Rachel. She has just won the Miss Oregon pageant. And I'll get into that. Let's go back to me. That was a little laugh there too, Julian. Okay. Boy, I told you, 11 a.m. was a little hyper this morning. I like it. But before I dig in, I got to say this. So at this point, we don't know each other. We've never met. We don't even know that we exist. And what we also don't know is this, that just around these two moments, we, both of us individually, are about ready to face some of the hardest trials of our life. And so you don't see that because we're both full of smiles. But here's what happened. So for me, I go to the East Coast for grad school. And you got to know, it may not seem like a big deal, but for me it was a big deal because I had grown up in Southern California my whole life. And I just wanted to get away. And for some reason at that time, I had dreams of settling down, New England. I loved the culture out there. And, I was going to go become a pastor, do ministry there. And that was my whole life. And all my dreams was like pastoring, doing ministry in New England. Again, I don't know, kind of crazy what I was thinking. But at the time, those were my dreams. But here's what happened. During that year of seminary, I had a lot of really weird physical symptoms. I had vision problems, I had headaches, I was lightheaded a lot, I had numbness and tingling all over my body. And so I'd gone to a lot of different doctors, a lot of different MRIs, all this kind of stuff, and I was convinced that I had a brain tumor or MS. And of course, I did all the tests, and none of them showed that. And so it was actually kind of even worse in that I wasn't diagnosed. And that the doctors couldn't, we don't know why you're having these things. There's no tumor in your head in the brain or MRI, so that can't be the case. But I'm convinced, right, because Dr. Google tells me that I have these things. And so what ended up happening was I ended up coming home for good. Because I needed to go back onto my parents' health insurance, which meant that I needed to come back home to do that. And I came home literally a couple days before the fall semester began, and I enrolled in Fuller Theological Seminary here in Pasadena locally. And that crushed my dreams. Because in some ways, I didn't want to come home, not because I didn't want to be with my parents or anything like that, but again, I wanted to do the East Coast thing. And so I was so discouraged, I was so frustrated, I was angry at God, and I was also kind of asking God, like, what are you doing? This is not the plan I have. This is actually the opposite of the plan I have. I felt defeated and confused. Now let's go back to Rachel. Just a month after winning the title, just a month after that picture of her on the stage with the thing on her, she was going to work one day, just normal day, completely routine. In her car, finds a parking spot, and this investigative reporter barges her way forward with the camera like shoved right in front of Rachel's face, and she just hurls accusations against Rachel, saying that she does not deserve to be Miss Oregon. And she begins to say, you were born in Indiana. You went to college in California. You're not a true Oregon resident, and you shouldn't be able to hold the title. Now, this whole thing turned into a huge media debacle, such that news trucks are now parked outside of Rachel's residence. Attorneys got involved. And like me, but I'd probably say more to a severe degree, Rachel's dreams, her future, were completely in limbo as she waited to hear what would transpire from this. And here's what happened. The authorities to be determined that Rachel was just a couple months shy of living in Oregon as long as they desired her to be in order to be their representative. And so after months, if not years of strict preparation, Rachel was asked to resign her title, to give back $11,000 in scholarship money. And then, of course, the worst thing was watching the first runner-up take her place on the Miss America stage months later. And so obviously, of course, she was devastated, confused. God, why would you allow this to happen? She did all the right things. She filled out all the paperwork, followed all the rules, and got passed. She's good to go. Why now, after the fact, are things being switched? So she moves back to Los Angeles to share and move into a studio apartment with her mom in Los Angeles. And at this point, she just didn't know what she was going to do next. Of course, her career aspirations of becoming a television journalist were practically closed doors now because, A, her name had been smeared all over Oregon and now across the internet. And so at the encouragement of a friend who was taking classes at a nearby seminary in Pasadena, Rachel figured that she would enroll as well. 6 months go by, and little do we know in this unplanned season for both Rachel and I, we are actually walking the same paths to classes at Fuller Theological Seminary in Pasadena. But actually, our paths had been crossing all year, and we didn't know it. See, remember, Rachel, she came back home to that studio apartment in LA, and she started waiting tables at a cheesecake factory in Glendale at the Americana, if you know where that's at. Well, actually, at that same time, as I was going through seminary, I worked at that Barnes & Noble in Glendale in the Americana as well, selling e-readers. We were parking in the same parking structure, walking basically to the same place at work, but not even just that. We then found out later that actually during our undergraduate years in Orange County, we were both going to the same church at the same Sunday night service at Rock Harbor Church in Costa Mesa. But it wasn't until April 16th, 2014, that we learned the other existed. When Rachel's chair in a 3-hour lecture broke, forcing her to move up a row and sit next to a stallion, me. I didn't say that for the 9 a.m. So she sat next to me, a fellow classmate she had never met, until the professor, and I always disliked these type of professors, the type of professor where, you know, they lecture a little bit, and then they tell you, now turn to your neighbor and discuss. You know what that is? You're a lazy professor and you're not teaching. But anyways, of course that was great. So I quickly, I don't want to get stuck next to this person because I got this girl right next to me. And so not only did we end up sharing discussion questions, but I shared my phone. And I put my phone right down in front of Rachel. She didn't have a choice. Hey, can you put your number in? And then, while we're both on break, you at Cheesecake Factory and me at Barnes & Noble, we can meet up. And I joked with her at the 9 a.m., she apparently thought it ran through her mind because Well, okay, let me say this. At the time when this happened, I actually had you guys know me and coffee. I always have coffee. I had a coffee mug on the desk thing. It was actually a Valentine's Day mug. And so she thought I was like married or something, and even though I didn't have a ring on, I got this Valentine's Day mug. Little did she know I was so cheap that my mom had given that to me, and that's why I have the cup there. So she's like, am I going to give this guy a fake number? But she's like, if I give him a fake number, I got to see him next Wednesday night, so that's not going to work either. So she gave me her real number, and the rest is history. Now, looking back on this story, of course, built a life, married, have kids, here we are. But those months leading up to that were extremely painful for both of us to walk, full of confusion, defeat, and crushed spirits. But now, we see God's hand in how he redeemed some extremely painful seasons and brought out some incredibly good, redemptive good out of it. That's what I want to talk to you about this morning. Because to be human is to experience disappointment, pain, and hardship. It doesn't sound like a caring thing to say, but it is, because it's not a matter of if those things will happen to you. It is a matter of when. And when those things happen to you, when you are in a season of hurt, of doubt, of anger, of confusion, maybe bitterness is starting to grow, the question that you're going to ask and you're going to wrestle with is, where is God? God, you're MIA. You're missing in action. And because we often don't understand why bad things are happening, we don't sense his presence. And here's what then happens. We begin to lose trust in him. We can't trust then that he's in control. We don't trust that God knows what he's doing. Unfortunately, this is what it means to be human often. Now, thankfully, the Bible doesn't address this issue with just kind of cold commands or like abstract philosophical directives that are unrelatable. The Bible, at least a good portion of it, are narratives, are real historical stories of humans who've actually gone through that exact same thing. And on this topic of going through hurt and disappointment and pain and suffering and where is God, there is none better than the character of Joseph. And so I want to talk to you this morning about Joseph. If you were here last Sunday, we started with Jonah, and we're in this series called Humans the Bible, and what we're doing is every Sunday we're looking at a different character throughout the scriptures. And there's no chronological order. We're just kind of choosing, well, not random characters, but certain characters and sharing their story. And so this morning it's Joseph. If you're unfamiliar with Joseph, his story is basically the second half of the book of Genesis. So Genesis, first book in the Bible, from chapters 37 to 50 is this story of Joseph. Now, of course, I don't have time to get into all 13 chapters this morning, so I'm going to kind of quickly weave us through. So let's just dig in right now. Genesis chapter 37, and we are introduced to this character at verse 2 in chapter 37. If you need a Bible this morning, we got these underneath your chairs, and I'm going to read from page 27. So here's where we pick it up. This is the first time that we hear about Joseph in the Bible. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Jacob is Joseph's dad. Joseph, a young man of 17, so this is a teenager, okay, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel, that's another name for Jacob, he loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. Are there any favorite children here? You think you're the most loved? Raise your hand. Okay. We'll pray for you. Did anybody just raise their hand with the sibling next to them? Oh, wow, you guys are actually all in agreement. Okay, I'm not going to ask any questions. Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and so he made an ornate robe for him. And when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him, and they could not speak a kind word to him. Wonderful. Verse 5, Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. And he said to them, and can you imagine if your youngest brother told you this? Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gather on mine and bow down to it. In other words, you're going to bow down to me. His brothers said to him, do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us? And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. And then, Joseph is a very humble teenager. He had another dream. And he told to his brothers, listen, he said, I had another dream. And this time, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And you can figure out what happens from there. So, here's what we got. We got a not-so-humble teenager, youngest boy in the family, and his dad loves him. He loves him so much that he gave him this really bougie coat. Clearly, his brothers are not a fan of him. And if you read the remaining chapters, actually even just that chapter, we don't have time to go into it, but read it later today or whatever. Here's what happens. Let me just give you the plot of the next 13 chapters. Here's what happens to Joseph. His brothers hate him so much that they basically kind of kidnap him, and they actually want to murder him, but one of them stops them from doing so, and so instead, out of their grace and mercy, they throw him in a cistern, basically kind of like a dungeon. And then, to make matters better, they sell him off to slavery in Egypt for silver. So just imagine being a 17-year-old boy, and your brothers sell you off into slavery to another country. That's full of brotherly love. Things get worse for Joseph. So now he becomes a slave. He's at his master's house. And actually things are going well. His master really likes him. Joseph's getting a good reputation. Except his master's wife finds him attractive, wants to sleep with him. Joseph, man of integrity, says no. She doesn't like that. And so then basically she frames him for sexual assault. Of course, the master believes his wife, and things get worse for Joseph because now that master sends him off to prison. So, Joseph's brothers make him a slave. Then when he's a slave, then he gets sold off, or then he goes to prison because the wife of that household falsely spreads a rumor about him trying to sexually assault her. Then, Joseph's in prison in Egypt. And Pharaoh, king of Egypt, has these two kind of government officials, a cupbearer and a baker. You can read about this, but the Pharaoh kicks them out into prison. They end up getting to know Joseph in prison. They learn that Joseph can interpret dreams, has the spiritual gift. Long story short, because of Joseph's interpretation of these dreams, these two get out of prison back to Pharaoh's court. But the deal was, Joseph had kind of made a deal with them and said, hey, I'm going to interpret this dream for you and all this stuff, but here's the deal. When you get back to Pharaoh, when you get out of prison, remember me and tell Pharaoh about me so he can get me out of prison. Hey, I'll hook you up, but take care of me too, don't forget. And Joseph's life by this point, they forget about him. So he stays in prison, even though these two dudes got out and go back to Pharaoh. Fast forward some more. Pharaoh has a dream. No one else can interpret and understand this dream. It is at this point then that the cupbearer, one of those government officials, remembers, oh yeah, the Joseph dude in prison, he interprets dreams. Tells Pharaoh about him. Pharaoh then at that point gets Joseph out of prison, and lo and behold, Joseph explains Pharaoh's dream and basically says this, hey, there's going to be an abundance of food in Egypt, but don't spend it. You actually need to save it, store it, because for 7 years after this, there's going to be a famine, and there's going to be no food. And so you need to save up the food now, not only to save your own country, but actually other countries and other people are going to come running to you, begging for food. And because you store up this food, basically salvation will come. Pharaoh takes this seriously, and then things begin to turn for Joseph. he basically becomes the governor of Egypt, the right-hand man, the VP to the Pharaoh of Egypt, the most powerful civilization at that time. And so it's this huge redemptive twist from going as slave, false sexual assault, kept in prison, and now that's all turned upside down, and he is in the second most highest position of power. And then the most ironic moment happens. Guess who comes into Egypt begging for food, and guess who they end up approaching and not even knowing it? Joseph's brothers. This is not a more ironic moment in the scriptures. And so here, let's pick up this scene now. Genesis chapter 45, verses 4 through 8, page 33 in the Bibles. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, and by the way, up to this point, they think that Joseph's still a slave, okay? They don't realize that they are facing their brother. "I am your brother Joseph, the one that you sold into Egypt." And listen to what Joseph tells them. "And now, do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there's been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing or reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth and to save your lives by a great deliverance." And what a statement. "So then it was not you who sent me here," which, by the way, it actually was. I mean, they sent him into slavery into Egypt. "It was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt." You got to know that Joseph spent years, decades, suffering, years of trial, unexplained misfortune. And Joseph now, he finally gets a break. Like, this is the redemptive turn. He's the second most highest position of power. It's like the whole time, now I see God here. But the question I want to ask is, has he been there the whole time, though? Let's go to Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. The last chapter of the book of Genesis. Years later now, here's the scene. Joseph and his brothers are together at a family gathering because their dad's going to die. Jacob, Israel. And so the brothers are kind of thinking, ooh, like Joseph hasn't gotten his revenge on us yet, but now maybe that dad's going to die. Maybe he's going to get his revenge on us now because dad's gone. Genesis 50:20. Joseph says this, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." Put otherwise, you planned evil against me, but God used your evil plans to actually bring about good. Literally, the salvation of lives. We can see God now, but was he there the whole time? Was the kidnapping and Joseph being sold off to slavery, was that just a coincidence? Was Joseph being falsely accused of sexual assault, was that just a coincidence? Was Joseph being in prison with 2 of Pharaoh's government officials, was that just a coincidence? Was Joseph's gifting of being able to interpret dreams, much less Pharaoh's dreams, and forecast an upcoming famine, was that just a coincidence? Was being able to save lives, not even just Egyptian lives, but even the surrounding civilizations, much less his own brothers, because of this very strategic government program that he developed, was that just all one big coincidence? I don't think so. Tim Keller writes this, "How many coincidences was that? We begin to lose count, But here's what we know. Unless every one of these little events had happened just as they did, and so many of them were bad, terrible things, Joseph would have never been sent to Egypt. But think how things would have gone if he had not gone to Egypt. Enormous numbers of people would have died. His own family would have died of starvation, and spiritually, his family would have been a disaster. Joseph would have been corrupted by pride, the brothers by their anger, and Jacob by his addictive, idolatrous love of his youngest sons. Was God absent the whole time in Joseph's life? Even when he was certain that God had forgotten him? No. Again, this started when he was 17, a teenager. All those years, for decades. Like, this wasn't a 6-month thing. For decades. I mean, we don't read this, but I think it's very safe to assume Joseph would have just cried out in prayer and agony when he's in a cistern that's dark and water and moldy, when he's in a prison. I just picture Joseph just yelling and crying out to God, God, where are you? God, get me out of here. Like, that's a very human thing to do. Was God not there? Oh, he was there. He may have been hidden, but he wasn't absent. May have been hidden, but he wasn't absent. Another Baum Keller quote. If God had given Joseph the things he was likely asking for in prayer, it would have been terrible for him. And we must realize that it was likely that God essentially said no relentlessly over and over to nearly all of Joseph's specific requests for a period of about 20 years. 20 years. Most people I know would have given up and said, if God is going to shut the door in my face every time I pray, year in and year out, then I give up. But think about this. If Joseph had given up, everything would have been lost. Despite all the years of unanswered prayer, Joseph was still trusting God. The point is this: God was hearing and responding to Joseph's prayers for deliverance, rescue, and salvation, but not in the ways or forms or times that Joseph asked for it. During which God seemed hidden, Joseph trusted God nonetheless. There's an Old Testament scholar, John Wall, and he says that Genesis 50:20, that iconic verse that says, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. Genesis 50:20 is not just the lesson of the Joseph story. It's actually the conclusion of the book of Genesis, meaning really the whole story of the Bible, from the first book in Genesis with Joseph to the very last book in Revelation, the whole story of the scriptures is God using evil for good, of God bringing beauty out of ashes. And here's the thing, God usually actually does this through the pain and heartache that we experience. Now, I need to be crystal clear on something. God does not create evil. God is not the author of sin, and he also doesn't delight in suffering. Absolutely not. Joseph's brothers, they were 100% completely the cause and held responsible for the evil done to Joseph. However, God is like the greatest mastermind redeemer, because God can take the chaos and the evil and the little things and what we see as coincidences, he actually uses those to accomplish his good purposes. In other words, God flips evil upside down. God restores the hurts in our life. He brings beauty out of broken places. Just as he did with Joseph thousands of years ago, he actually does the exact same thing in you today. Joseph isn't just some character in fictional story from 3,000 years ago. It's actually the human experience and story today. Now, I shared with you my story, Rachel and I, kind of the beginning as like our own personal thing. I came across this story again from Tim Keller, which is, you'll see by the time we get to the very end of the story, man, this is like, it's a crazy story, and there's a decent amount of humor to it. Here's the context you need to know before I share the story. I'm just going to read it, actually. Keller, he's passed away now, but he pastored a church in New York City called Redeemer Presbyterian Church. Extremely influential church. Like, he's a hero of mine and many other pastors across the world. And he tells this origin story of how his church, Redeemer Presbyterian, came to be. Listen to this. I sometimes ask people in my church in New York City, Redeemer Presbyterian, are you glad this church exists? They are, thankfully. Then I point out an interesting string of Joseph-like coincidences that brought it all about. Redeemer exists to a great degree because my wife, Kathy, and I were sent to New York City to start this as a new church. Well, why were we sent? It was because we joined a Presbyterian denomination that encouraged church planting, and that sent us out. But why did we join a Presbyterian denomination? Well, we joined it because in the very last semester of my last year in seminary, I had 2 courses under a particular professor who convinced me to adopt the doctrines and beliefs of Presbyterianism. But why was that professor at that seminary at that time? He was only there because after a long period of waiting, he was finally able to get his visa as a citizen of Great Britain to come and teach in the United States. This professor had been hired by my U.S. seminary, but had been given a great deal of trouble getting a visa. For various reasons at the time, the process was very clogged, and there was an enormous amount of backlog of applications. So what was it that broke through all the red tape so that he could get his visa and come and teach me in that very last semester of seminary? Well, at that time, there was a student at the seminary that was able to give the school administration an unusually high-level form of help. The student was the son of the sitting president of the United States at that time. Why was his father president? Well, it was because the former president, Richard Nixon, had to resign as a result of the Watergate scandal. But why did the Watergate scandal ever occur? Well, the way I understand it, it's because a night watchman noticed an unlatched door. What if the security guard had not noticed that door? What if he had simply looked in a different direction? In that case, nothing else in that long string of coincidences would have ever occurred. And there would be no Redeemer Presbyterian Church in the city. Do you think that all happened by accident? I don't. If that did not all happen by accident, then nothing happens by accident. And I like this line. I like to say to people at Redeemer, if you are glad for this church, then even Watergate happened for you. Brothers and sisters, the invitation for you this morning, as we look at this human character, the story of Joseph, is this. Do you trust God when he seems hidden? Now, it's easy to trust God when things are going good. That's not what I'm asking. I think the story of Joseph provokes us to ask, do we trust God when he seems hidden? In other words, when you're going through disappointment and suffering and hurt and trials, in that season, do you trust him? When he feels hidden, and I say feels hidden because I don't think he's absent. He's there, but he feels hidden. Do you trust that he's there and that he's doing something? Do you trust God not just with the good things, but actually the little things and maybe even the bad things? Do you trust that what they meant for evil, he will use for good? Now, sometimes, not even sometimes, actually probably often, Joseph had this really unique life in that towards the end of his life, he saw it all come full circle, right? He becomes vice president, governor, his brothers end up bowing down to him. Like, it all ends up okay for him. I am very aware pastorally that many of us do not have that fortunate life in that by the end of our life, we see the answer and the unfolding to all the bad things in our life become redemptive. And I'm aware of that. I'm super sensitive to that. And so for many of us, it is not until Jesus comes back, when he kind of ushers eternity into session, that we will understand everything. And so then you're kind of like, well, Mark, if I can't understand everything until Jesus comes back, how can I be certain to trust him now? If I can't understand everything until Jesus comes back, why should I trust him now? And here's what I want to say. You can be certain to trust God now in the midst of all your pain and disappointment, not because you can understand it, but because there's actually a better and more ultimate Joseph. What do I mean? You see, centuries after Joseph lived, did you know that there came another man who was also betrayed by his brethren? We read that his family disowned him. His hometown disowned him. He was betrayed also. And you know what's fascinating? He was also sold for silver, just like Joseph. Just like Joseph, this man was also chained. That just like Joseph, this man pleaded with God to take the suffering from him. God, I don't want to do this. But this Joseph, this better and more ultimate Joseph, surrendered to God's will. He trusted the Father, and he lovingly died for his enemies. What if actually the story and character of Joseph the whole time, starting in Genesis, is nothing but actually a foreshadowing of the main character and hero of the Bible itself, Jesus? Acts 2, 23 to 24, the Apostle Peter, he recounts this story saying this, this man, this Jesus, was handed over to you by God's deliberate plan and foreknowledge. And you, with the help of wicked men, put him to death by nailing him to the cross. That's what you meant for evil. And now here comes the God used for good part. But God raised him from the dead, freeing him from the agony of death because it was impossible for death to keep its hold on him. See, in Jesus, God took the evil that was done to him and he turned it to good for your benefit, for mine, for the world's. What you meant for evil, I used to bring salvation to the entire ends of the earth. Now imagine this. Imagine that you were one of the early followers of Jesus. So you've walked Israel with him. You've seen him multiply fish. You've seen him multiply bread. You've seen him heal people. You've seen him love on the poor and all the social outcasts of the day. You love this man and you believe that he's the Son of God. That's everything you've seen and you believe. And then you get to Good Friday and you're with those early disciples who dared look at that cross and they want the Son of God, this good man, is now bleeding and dying on a cross? What? Can you imagine being one of those people? Keller writes this, there you are at the cross with a few of his disciples who have the stomach to watch. And you hear people say this, I've had it with this God. How could he abandon the best man we have ever seen? You thought about that before? That the Father abandoned his Son. I don't see how God could bring any good out of this. What would you say? You would likely agree. And yet, you are standing there looking at the greatest, most brilliant thing God could ever do for the human race. On the cross, Both justice and love are being satisfied. Evil, sin, and death are being defeated. You are looking at an absolute beauty. But because you cannot fit it into your own limited understanding, you are in danger of walking away from God. Do what Jesus did. Trust God. Do what Joseph did. Trust God, even in the dungeon. Even though we cannot know all the particular reasons for our crosses, we can look at the cross and know that God is working all things out. That is gospel. That is good news. That what the enemy meant for evil, God used. He didn't author it, he didn't create it, he didn't rejoice in it. But God is so redemptive. He's the definition of redeemer. And he redeemed the most horrible thing that Satan and human beings could do, to crucify the Son of God. He was perfect. He didn't do anything wrong. And he was crucified. But God uses that to save the world. And the question is then, when you're in your dungeon and you don't understand him, and you don't feel him, and he feels hidden, what did Jesus say in the garden? Not my will, but your will be done. You can trust him. You can't figure him out and explain him. And by the way, if you could, then I don't think that's a God I want to serve. But you can trust him. And that's proof. Now, if he stayed that way, I wouldn't trust him. But he came out of that grave and he put that thing down. What you meant for evil, I meant for good. That is gospel. And he does the exact same thing in your life today. That's why you can trust him. If you've been around the bridge, you know that the first Sunday of each month, we take corporate communion. And so we have the elements right here. We have the 4 tables up here. If you're new to Jesus, if you haven't given your life to Jesus, there's zero pressure to take communion this morning. No one is going to look at you weird or judge you. This is something that we do to kind of reorient our lives, our hearts, our minds, even with the story of Joseph, which I think is a foreshadow of the story of Jesus. The cup represents his blood poured out for you. The bread represents his body broken for you. These are the things that they meant for evil. Like I can say in my own heart, I know my heart's broken enough that if I lived back then, I probably would have been one of the ones that crucified him. I would have been one of the ones saying, God, what are you doing? Why is this good man being crucified? And then in hindsight, I realized, it's because he's doing everything for my good. And he loves me. And he loves me so much that he died for me so that he could reverse the curse. This is why we take communion, to remind ourselves of that story, because I am a very forgetful person. So I'm going to invite our elders and deacons to come forward at the tables. We have 4 stations. Whatever station is closest to you, I would encourage you to go up to. I'm going to invite the band up right now. They're going to lead us in 2 songs. After you take communion, you can receive the elements, take it back to your chair, maybe pray with your spouse or friend or spend time with yourself reflecting. There's going to be a prayer team up here on both sides that you can receive prayer for anything you need. Maybe you right now, like you are in a dark valley and God feels hidden to you, and that's okay. That's okay. Like this isn't a sermon of like, oh, life's tough, just smile, fake smile. No, life is tough. And it's in the midst of that valley. God, I don't understand you. I don't feel you. You don't make sense to me. But I'll trust and surrender to you. That's actually a very robust faith, and it's an honest faith. Let's pray, and then we can come forward to receive communion. Father, would you minister to our hearts? Would you send your Spirit to soften our calloused and numb hearts? May you reawaken us to your redemptive power. For those of us who are struggling with bitterness and anger and are wanting to walk away, God, may you run towards us. May your love overwhelm us, and may we sense your presence. Come, Holy Spirit. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. You may now come forward.